They thought she was just a diversity hire. They whispered behind her back, laughed to her face, and plotted to humiliate her. But they forgot one thing. You don't survive growing up on the south side of Chicago without learning how to fight back, quietly. And when Kesha Washington finally did, it only took 60 seconds for every lie, every laugh, and every privilege to collapse. The first thing Kesha Washington noticed about room 301 was how quiet it got when she walked in. Not respectful quiet, predatory quiet. 16 teenagers stared at her like she was a glitch in the system. Some smirked. One girl barely looked up from her phone. A boy in the back popped his gum so loudly it echoed off the linoleum floors. She stepped to the front, uncapped a marker, and wrote her name on the board in clean, steady strokes. Miss Washington. No frills. No explanation. Just presence. Look who they sent to educate us. Came a voice from the back, loud, theatrical, and sharp enough to slice through the silence. Tyler Morrison. Star swimmer. Local celebrity. Son of the Morrison. I bet she's only here because of racial quotas, he added, chuckling as his friends leaned in to whisper and snicker. Laughter spread like wildfire. A phone screen lit up. Madison Pierce, ever the influencer in training, held hers just low enough to film without being obvious. Jessica Kumar, class valedictorian in waiting, rolled her eyes, but not at Tyler, at Kesha. Kesha capped her marker, turned slowly, and faced them. Interesting theory, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had weight. A stillness that made chairs squeak as students sat up straighter, without realizing. She looked directly at Tyler. Tyler Morrison, right? Son of Richard Morrison. Your family's car dealership was audited by the IRS last year. That must have been stressful. The grin vanished from his face. She pivoted. And Madison Pierce, daughter of Councilwoman Pierce, who voted against the free lunch program for low-income students. I wonder how your followers would react to that. Madison's phone dropped slightly in her hand. Kesha let the silence stretch. Just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. See, I read files too. Nobody laughed. No one whispered. Even Jessica closed her notebook without a sound. Now, Kesha continued, walking back to the board with the same unsettling calm. Let's talk about To Kill a Mockingbird. Can anyone tell me why Atticus Finch is considered a hero? Silence. Not because they didn't know, but because the game had shifted, and no one knew the new rules yet. Kesha opened her copy of the book, voice even and unreadable. Maybe, because he stood up for someone everyone else had already condemned. Because sometimes doing the right thing means being hated for it. Tyler tried to interrupt, but she cut him off with a glance. And because the people who think they're at the top of the food chain, she said quietly, are always the ones who fall the hardest when they forget to check the ground beneath their feet. No one spoke after that. Not because they respected her. Not yet. But because they realized for the first time that she was not who they thought. And that maybe they weren't either. Tyler Morrison liked being the center of gravity. At Lincoln High, power didn't come from grades or grit. It came from nameplates on buildings and last names in boardrooms. His family had both. Morrison Automotive funded half the school's sports program. His face was in brochures. His jokes were law. Beside him sat Madison Pierce, phone always in hand, angles always right. She was the kind of girl who curated her identity like a brand deal. Soft smiles, hard stares, and captions that pretended to be deep. Her mother's position on the city council gave her just enough political polish to disguise the sharp edges beneath. Then there was Jessica Kumar, straight A's, perfect attendance, and a tongue like a scalpel. While Tyler controlled the air, and Madison controlled the narrative, Jessica played chess, correcting teachers mid-lecture, quoting case law, and tearing classmates down with a single passive-aggressive compliment. The three of them didn't just float at the top, they policed it. Did you see her shoes? Madison whispered after Kesha left the room for a moment, between classes. Worn at the toes. She's definitely not from here. Jessica didn't look up. My dad says Northwestern's diversity program takes anyone. You don't need real merit. Just the right background. Tyler leaned back, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the door. She's gonna cry before Friday. They always do, because that was the game. Every semester brought in a fresh hire, young and full of ideals, thinking they could change the world with literature, and seating charts. But they didn't last long in room 301. Not with the subtle warfare Tyler and his crew had mastered: quiet sabotage, relentless scrutiny, and the kind of social media smears that never left a fingerprint. They once made a history teacher so paranoid, she stopped using slides altogether. Another teacher asked for a transfer mid-year. One of the few black teachers before Kesha had lasted 3 weeks. Rumor was she still flinched when she saw private school uniforms. So when Kesha didn't flinch at Tyler's joke, didn't stumble when Madison filmed her, didn't cower when Jessica challenged her authority with a raised brow and a fake question. Something about generational trauma in The Great Gatsby. They didn't see it as strength. They saw it as bait. "She thinks she's clever," Tyler said during lunch. "Let's see how clever she feels when we post that clip with the Woke Warriors soundtrack." Madison already had the video queued up. Jessica had drafted a follow-up question for next class, something loaded with enough nuance to trap Kesha no matter how she answered. They'd done this before, and it had always worked. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Kesha had walked through fire before, and they weren't playing a game. They were stepping into a trap they'd mistake for a lesson, until it was too late to walk out. Kesha Washington didn't come to room 301 to make friends. She came to study a battlefield. She didn't react when Tyler laughed, didn't flinch when Madison filmed, didn't raise her voice when Jessica twisted questions into traps. That kind of reaction was what they were fishing for. She could see it in their eyes. The smug expectancy, the bated breath of teenagers who had always won by pushing just hard enough to draw blood, but never leave a mark. She let it wash over her like background noise. Instead she watched. The way Tyler constantly looked sideways after speaking, seeking validation. The way Madison tilted her phone just enough to stay under the radar, but not enough to hide her intent. The way Jessica weaponized intellect, not to understand, but to dominate. Kesha had grown up around sharper predators than this. By age 12, she could read an entire room before a single word was spoken. Her mother used to call it walking into fire with wet feet, knowing how to step, when to pause, when to make the heat work for you instead of against you. So while they mocked, she memorized. She watched who laughed and who stayed silent, who leaned in and who leaned back, who looked at her with contempt and who looked away in shame. She took notes, not just on attendance or participation, but on dynamics, power flows, unspoken alliances. And she smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. She'd seen this exact performance before, in different costumes at faculty meetings where her ideas were ignored until a white colleague repeated them, at panel discussions where she was introduced as a great diversity voice, before being asked to speak last, at job interviews where the smile froze once she walked in the room. This was just another version of the same script. But what they didn't understand, what they could never understand, is that Kesha had stopped trying to survive that script a long time ago. Now, she rewrote them. Each time she walked into room 301, she carried with her a growing ledger, not of grudges, but of precision. Every look, every whisper, every manipulative moment, disguised as a question. She logged it, filed it, categorized it. She wasn't collecting evidence to complain. She was preparing to educate. Because if there was one thing Kesha understood better than any textbook, it was this: you don't dismantle power by shouting over it. You do it by knowing it better than it knows itself, then waiting for the perfect moment to show it what it missed. So she let them think they were winning. Let them whisper, let them plot, let them laugh. Because while they played high school games, Kesha was preparing a masterclass. By the end of her second week, Kesha had a folder buried beneath her lesson plans, labeled only with a single word: patterns. It wasn't about one video, or one whisper. It was about momentum. Tyler and his crew didn't just push, they tested. First with smirks and side comments, then with accidental tech glitches during presentations. Jessica once raised her hand to correct Kesha mid-lecture, citing a misattributed quote, loudly, confidently, and wrong. Madison posted a story with the caption, "When your English teacher needs spell check," under a blurry photo of Kesha's handwritten notes. The students laughed. Kesha copied the post, saved it, added it to the folder. They didn't notice. That was the beauty of it. They mistook her silence for surrender. But she was just documenting the architecture of their arrogance. She had learned early in life that confrontation meant little without record. When she was 15, she watched her mother lose her nursing job over an accusation disproven too late. Since then, Kesha never went anywhere without a mental recorder running. Every screenshot, every passive-aggressive comment, every public challenge followed by private smugness. And then Dr. Marcus Chun. He found her in the staff lounge on a Wednesday, sipping cold coffee and scrolling through messages on her school-issued tablet. He didn't sit, just stood beside her chair, hands folded behind his back like always. "They've started on you," he said quietly. Kesha didn't look up. "They start on everyone." He slid a plain manila envelope onto the table. Inside, printouts, social media posts, overheard conversations, notes written in sharp, precise handwriting. "I've seen this cycle for 15 years, he murmured. "They always pick the ones they know will make them uncomfortable, and they always go too far." She glanced up, surprised, not at his words, but at how calmly he said them. "You've been watching." He nodded. "Some of us always are. We just don't always know when it's safe to step in." She studied him, an Asian American man with the stillness of someone who had long stopped expecting fair fights. "I'm not trying to make this a war," Kesha said softly. He gave her a faint smile. "Neither am I, but if it becomes one, I'd rather not be unarmed." Kesha looked back down at the envelope. There were things in there even she hadn't seen: private group messages, hallway comments, captured by chance, screenshots from accounts she wasn't supposed to know existed. She placed it gently into her folder, now labeled evidence, because Tyler and his group weren't just poking at her. They were building a story they thought would never be challenged. And Kesha, she was preparing the rebuttal, quietly, precisely, like someone who knew how to survive a storm by recording every drop of rain. Dr. Marcus Chun didn't knock. He just slipped the folder onto Kesha's desk, like it was a term paper, and kept walking. She glanced at it between grading essays. Plain manila, no label, sealed with a single paperclip. For a moment she just stared at it. Not because she didn't know what it was, but because she did. Inside, screenshots of the DI Disaster Instagram group chats from hallway confidence, snippets of conversations overheard in locker rooms and after-school hangouts. One page had a transcript of Tyler's whispered comment in the cafeteria. "Give it a few more days. She'll beg to be transferred." She flipped through slowly, her fingers careful, reverent. "Where did you get all this?" she asked without looking up. Dr. Chun paused in the doorway. "The school's been ignoring this kind of thing for years. Kids talk when they think no one's listening. I just started listening." Kesha held up one screenshot. Jessica arguing in a group message that Kesha's presence was optics over quality. "You've been collecting all this?" she said, more softly this time. He nodded. "Not for them. For you. Because I've been where you are." Different face, same battlefield. She stared at the folder, then closed it gently. Her shoulders, always held tight like coiled wires, loosened just enough to make her exhale. "I thought I was alone," she said. "You're not," Dr. Chun replied. "Not anymore." There was a moment, a small fragile moment, where the weight she carried seemed to lift an inch. The kind of moment that didn't make headlines, but made survival feel possible. She hadn't smiled in weeks. Not a real one. But now, just faintly, it rose. Not joy, not relief. Recognition. Dr. Chun turned to go but stopped. "They're underestimating you," he said. "And that's the biggest mistake they can make." Kesha didn't respond right away. She traced the edge of the folder, with her thumb like it was a match she wasn't ready to strike. Then finally, her voice low and certain, "Good." She placed the folder beside her own. Hers was thicker, worn from use, corners curled from hours of flipping. The label had changed over time, from patterns to evidence, to what it now read in neat permanent marker: reckoning. The trap wasn't just tightening, it had been wired shut. All it needed now was timing. And Kesha Washington had always been patient. They thought she was there to teach books. They hadn't realized she came to teach truth. And this folder was her textbook. The lesson plan didn't look like much, just a single page, printed cleanly, tucked between copies of To Kill a Mockingbird. At the top, in bold, narrative consequences. No objectives, no standards listed, Just 3 words, scribbled in the margins, like a dare. Let them watch. While Tyler and his crew laughed in corners and edited videos for clout, Kesha stayed late in her classroom with the blinds drawn and the door locked. She wasn't grading anymore. She was designing. Each move was mapped with the precision of someone who had been gaslit, dismissed, underestimated, and had learned over time that justice wasn't something you waited for. It was something you built. She crafted emails, like blueprints. Short, surgical. Attached were PDFs of evidence, time-stamped logs, internal behavior reports never filed through the usual channels. She sent them to 3 education reporters, 2 school board members, and 1 parent-led watchdog account with over 50,000 Twitter followers. Each email had the same subject line. A lesson in accountability. Please attend Friday's class, room 301. Next, she assembled the folder. Dr. Chun's intel, her screenshots, photos, notes, arranged not by offense, but by pattern. A narrative. Not just bullying, but a system, one built on power and pretense, protected by wealth and insulated by silence. She included everything, even the things that hurt to relive, the early doubts, the sleepless nights, the humiliation she'd swallowed in week 1, when a sophomore asked her if she was qualified to be here, or just here to check boxes. She added a final page, a printed list of every student who had laughed, liked, or looked away, not to punish, to make them see. By Wednesday night, the classroom had transformed. The old posters were replaced with blank paper labeled narrative, arcs. The projector remote sat beside a stack of labeled folders, and Kesha's desk held a single box, sealed, weighted, and silent. She called it the archive. It didn't just hold receipts. It held a reckoning. When the last email was sent, she leaned back in her chair. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from adrenaline, because for the first time in months, she wasn't playing defense. She was preparing to teach. Not Harper Lee, not metaphors or motifs, but truth, about power, about cruelty, about what happens when the underestimated stop explaining and start exposing. They thought they'd made her afraid, but what they'd really done, without knowing it, was give her an audience. And on Friday morning, room 301 would become the stage, and the lesson would be unforgettable. Thursday afternoon, room 301 hummed with lazy anticipation, the kind that settles in before a long weekend, when students stop pretending to care and teachers stop pretending to notice. But Kesha noticed everything. She stood at the front of the room, her hands resting lightly on the podium, a calm so controlled it almost looked rehearsed. Tomorrow, she said, her voice even, we'll be doing something a little different. Tyler, half reclined in his chair, smirked. Another lesson on oppression, he mumbled, just loud enough for the girls beside him to giggle. Kesha didn't flinch. She looked directly at him, eyes steady. A lesson on narrative consequences, she replied. Madison snorted. Sounds deep. Jessica raised an eyebrow. What does that even mean? Kesha's lips curved, something between a smile and a warning. It means we're going to explore what happens when a character underestimates someone they think they understand, and how that story always ends with a twist. The air shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Tyler tilted forward slightly, something flickering across his face. Was it curiosity, or the beginning of doubt? We'll also be joined by some special guests, Kesha added, turning to jot the phrase, character assumptions across the board. Parents, staff, a few people from the community. I thought it might be educational. There was a beat of silence, then the snickers returned. Great, Madison whispered to Jessica. She's inviting the PTA to her TED Talk. Tyler leaned back again, folding his arms like a king on a crumbling throne. Good. Let 'em all see how she handles pressure. Kesha turned from the board and looked out at them. Not with anger, not even with disappointment, with certainty. Like someone holding the last page of a novel everyone else still thought they were writing. She clicked her pen shut, gathered her materials, and said, You may want to get some rest tonight. Tomorrow's lesson might stay with you longer than you expect. As she walked to her desk, Tyler called out behind her, planning on grading us on our trauma responses. A few scattered laughs followed, but the laughter didn't reach the corners of the room. Not this time. A few students glanced at each other, uncertain. One boy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Another girl closed her notebook without being told. Because for all the arrogance, Tyler wielded like a weapon. Something in Kesha's tone cut deeper. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was ready. And when someone like Kesha Washington stops playing the role she was assigned, it's never the story that ends. It's the illusion that there was ever a safe one to tell. Friday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Tyler Morrison strutted into room 301 like it was his coronation. Crisp polo shirt, fresh haircut, and that same lazy confidence that always followed him into spaces he thought he owned. His mother, Catherine Morrison, was already seated in the front row, designer handbag at her feet, arms crossed like a courtroom judge waiting to deliver a verdict. Two other parents flanked her, nodding politely, smug in their shared belief that this would be the end of the school's latest experiment in forced diversity. Kesha stood near the projector, her laptop closed. Calm, impossibly calm. "Good morning, class," she said, "and welcome to our guests. Today's lesson is on narratives, how they're built, and how they unravel." Tyler leaned over to Madison and whispered, "She really brought an audience for her own funeral." The projector beeped on. The screen lit up. Then it happened. The first slide appeared. White background, bold black letters, DI Disaster, a private Instagram group. Underneath it screenshots, Madison's captions, photos taken without consent, hashtags that dripped with sarcasm, and coded cruelty. The room froze. Catherine Morrison sat up straighter. "Excuse me, what is this?" Kesha didn't answer. She clicked again, now screenshots of group chats. Tyler's name at the top, his exact words. "She's just another woke hire. Let's make her life miserable until she quits." The silence was suffocating. "Do you recognize this group, Tyler?" Kesha asked, her voice even. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Click. A video played. Tyler's edited montage mocking Kesha's lectures, set to music that distorted her voice into something cartoonish. A timestamp glowed in the corner. It had been posted on the school's TikTok account. Madison's hands flew to her mouth. Jessica stared at the floor. "How did you even? This is private. This is illegal." Tyler finally blurted. Kesha turned toward the back of the room. "Dr. Chun, would you mind explaining?" Marcus Chun stood quietly, holding a folder. Public Instagram stories, screenshots shared voluntarily, messages overheard and documented on school property. Every piece gathered within district policy. Click. The screen now showed emails. Subject lines. Concerns about Kesha Washington. Is Lincoln becoming too progressive? And signatures. Richard Morrison. Catherine Morrison. Private correspondence. Catherine hissed. "This is outrageous." "No," Kesha said softly. "This is a pattern. A coordinated campaign to discredit and remove me, based not on performance but on prejudice." Click. The final image hit like a gavel. A front-page article. Morrison family under federal investigation for tax evasion. Tyler slumped in his chair. The blood drained from his face. Catherine stood, eyes darting, lips parted but useless. Kesha looked at them all, not with vengeance, but clarity. "This is what happens," she said, "when you underestimate the wrong person." And for the first time since she entered room 301, no one laughed, no one spoke. They just watched as the story they thought they were writing collapsed in real time, under the weight of every lie they'd convinced themselves was truth. By the time the third slide appeared, the classroom didn't feel like a classroom anymore. It felt like a courtroom. And Kesha Washington wasn't just a teacher. She was the prosecutor, the witness, and the verdict, all wrapped in one calm, relentless presence. Slide after slide lit up the projector screen, messages with Tyler's name attached, laughing emojis, coordinated plans. "Let's call her Miss Wokington in class today." One read, "Bonus points if she snaps." Another chimed in. Then the donations. Financial records showing Richard Morrison's $50,000 contribution to Councilman Hutchkins. Coincidentally, the same councilman who had campaigned against the school's diversity hiring program just months before. "This is a public record," Kesha said, her voice razor-sharp but measured. "It's remarkable what a few clicks on campaign finance logs can tell you." Catherine Morrison stood suddenly. "This is out of line. You're humiliating my son in front of the entire school." Kesha didn't even look at her. "Humiliation," she said, "requires innocence. This is exposure. There's a difference." Click. Now came the racist posts, likes and comments from Madison's public accounts, a meme mocking black professionals, a tweet calling affirmative action, a joke for underachievers. Her handle glowed at the top of each post. Madison was crying now, her makeup streaked, her phone trembled in her hand, but she didn't dare raise it. Click. Jessica's messages, neatly transcribed. "Scholarship kids are just welfare in hoodies." A photo of a classmate circled with the words, "Guess who needed a free ride to get here?" Jessica shrank in her seat, arms wrapped tightly around herself like a barrier that couldn't hold. Kesha turned back to the class. "This is what unchecked power looks like," she said. "This is what entitlement sounds like, when it thinks no one is listening." But someone was always listening. Tyler tried to interrupt. "You hacked us. You can't. This isn't fair." "Fair," Kesha repeated, turning slowly. "Fair is not your family calling for my removal, while secretly being investigated for tax fraud. Fair is not being filmed, mocked, and humiliated for doing my job." She stepped forward. "What's not fair is that students who needed me to show up every day were almost denied that chance, because of you." The air was electric, heavy with something that couldn't be undone. Every eye in the room was fixed on the screen, on Kesha, on the wreckage of reputations unraveling in real time. "This isn't revenge," she said, lifting the folder. "This is a lesson, and like every lesson in this school, it comes with consequences." One last slide, a timeline, 2 years of bullying, a digital footprint, names, dates, screenshots, organized like a prosecution brief. Copies have been sent to the school board, the district, and 3 education watchdogs, she added. Tyler collapsed forward, head in his hands. His kingdom was gone, his story rewritten, and the teacher he tried to destroy had just authored his reckoning. The news spread faster than gossip ever had. By Monday morning, the front office was a war zone of ringing phones and tight-lipped administrators. 3 students had been suspended, pending district investigation. Tyler Morrison, Madison Pierce, Jessica Kumar. Official statements cited targeted harassment, digital misconduct and academic sabotage. Unofficially, everyone just called it the reckoning. Tyler's face, once smirking in every hallway, now appeared in a leaked screenshot with the caption, "This didn't age well." His father's dealership website had its contact form flooded with furious messages. Catherine Morrison tried to run damage control, but there was no salvaging it now. Not with reporters camping outside her gated community. Not with federal agents combing through years of falsified tax records. Jessica's full-ride scholarship to Stanford vanished with one email. Her application flagged. Her digital footprint reviewed. The admissions board didn't need to ask questions. They had screenshots. She cried in the counselor's office. Not because she was sorry, because she'd finally learned what it meant to lose something she thought was hers by default. Madison deleted all her social media. Her influencer brand deals disappeared overnight. No one wanted to collaborate with the girl caught mocking teachers of color while preaching allyship in pastel captions. She showed up to school one day later, hood up, eyes down. No one sat with her at lunch, and room 301 felt different. The snickering stopped. Phones stayed down. Students who used to whisper now raised their hands. Some even apologized. Kesha didn't gloat. She didn't change her tone. She still taught with the same calm, deliberate cadence. But when she stood at the front of the room now, the air around her held something new. Weight, respect, presence. No one called her Miss Wokington. Now they called her Miss Washington, and they meant it. After the final bell rang that day, she stood alone for a moment. Her eyes traced the sunlight spilling across the desks. The room that had once felt like a lion's den was now just a classroom again. Dr. Chun appeared at the door, arms crossed, a faint smile on his face. "You did it," he said. Kesha shook her head. "We did." She gathered her papers. The folder, once fat with evidence, was gone now, replaced with lesson plans and a slim binder marked Leadership Curriculum Proposal. As she stepped into the hallway, students nodded at her. One opened the door for her. Another simply said, "Thank you." She didn't smile. She didn't need to, because the power she had walked in with was finally visible. And this time, no one could pretend they didn't see it. 6 months later, no one called her the new teacher anymore. Kesha Washington had become a name far beyond Lincoln High. Her method, quiet documentation, structured accountability, and narrative exposure, was now known across the country as the Washington Protocol. Over 200 schools had adopted it. 4 states were considering legislation modeled after it. A 30-minute documentary about Room 301's transformation had just been nominated for an Emmy. But Kesha never let the spotlight distract her. She still arrived at school early, coffee in hand, still greeted students by name, still taught To Kill a Mockingbird, but now followed it with lessons on Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. The classroom walls had changed too, lined now with student-led projects on justice, empathy, and storytelling. Room 301 had become more than a class. It had become a mirror, and slowly, the school changed with it. Elena Rodriguez, once too shy to speak, now led the school's diversity council. David Kim, a former target of hallway jokes, started a peer mentoring program. Students who had once stayed silent, now raised their voices, not with arrogance, but with purpose. And then, one morning, Kesha received a message she hadn't expected. It was from Tyler Morrison. The email subject read, "Accountability." He wrote from a rehabilitation center 3 hours away. Therapy, community service, counseling. Not court-ordered, voluntary. He admitted to everything. The posts, the cruelty, the privilege he had never recognized until it shattered beneath him. "I know you didn't have to teach me," the message read, "but you did. You could have destroyed me. Instead, you showed me exactly who I was, and who I could still become. That's the real lesson, isn't it?" Kesha stared at the message for a long time, not with anger, not even with forgiveness. With quiet understanding. She didn't reply right away. She closed her laptop, stood by the window of her new office at the National Foundation for Inclusive Education, and watched students pour into the schoolyard below. Black, brown, white, quiet ones, loud ones, the overlooked, and the overconfident, all of them walking into a world she had helped change. Because this was never just about revenge. It wasn't about going viral, or taking down a name. It was about rewriting the terms of what power looked like, what respect looked like, what teaching looked like. Later that day, she finally replied to Tyler's email. "Growth begins when we stop expecting grace, and start earning it. Keep going. Not for me, for whoever walks into your story next." And then she turned back to her work. Because Kesha Washington had never been just a target. She was an architect, and the foundation she built was just the beginning. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes silence is strength and prejudice goes unnoticed. Comment below with a time you were underestimated, and how you rose anyway. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories where justice isn't just spoken, it's taught.